why have you never told me before that in the comics, Thanos has made Hulk into his dog? And Hulk also ate Captain America in the same comic.
I'm not sure what issue this is. I must not have ever read it.
It's the Thanos comic, apparently.
Well, he's had a lot of series.
2016, I believe.
Oh, yeah, no, I haven't.
It's the one where Punisher's Ghost Rider.
Oh, yeah, Cosmic Ghost Rider, yeah.
And the Hulk is Thanos' Hulk Hound. He has him on a leash, and he feeds him, apparently, Avengers. I don't know.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty fucked up. Because apparently it's revealed that Hulk is immortal.
Yeah, that's the name of his title now, is the Immortal Hulk.
I don't know if I like that.
I haven't read it. I was actually thinking about checking it out. Since, everything's going on, have a little bit more free time. Because I hear it's pretty good. But yeah, I don't know why he can't be killed or how any of that works. I was never a big Hulk guy, so I only read things that after the fact, after I've heard that they've been good, and then I eventually check them out.
Yeah, Hulk's kind of like Superman, and it's hard to write good Hulk stories, I would think, because he's so powerful.
Yeah,
I mean, he at least has more of a human element to him, but even so, it's still, I mean, he's kind of impervious. Now, if he's immortal, he's really impervious to danger. I mean, what are you going to do to him? You could throw him in outer space and he just floats and is like, fuck, this sucks. I don't know.
Oh, could you imagine him coming back through the atmosphere? Like the crater that he would leave?
It'd be like a fucking meteorite. It'd be like a Hulk bomb. Well, that's very disappointing. Then you can enlighten me further on something I read today randomly on the internet.
Yeah. Well, before Thanos was always is a weird character, because before the gauntlet thing going on, he was this not very super powered bad guy. He had a helicopter.
He wasn't very menacing. And He was always like, "Drat."
Yeah.
Drat! You fooled me again. And he kind of just fooled himself. He always made himself lose, kind of. But yeah, he wasn't really intimidating by any means. He was kind of a nerdy villain.
But then whenever you get, the power to change and control the cosmos and, reality and everything
you become kind of a dick.
Yeah, I mean, who wouldn't? I
would.
What I would do with a snap.
2 chicks at the same time.
Yeah.
with if you wield all the power in the universe, that's what you would do? 2 chicks at the same time.
Or maybe 3.
Whoa. No, that's pushing it. Hey there, everybody. You are listening to the Drunken Pen Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Caleb James. With me today, let me check the note on my hand that's not actually there. Ooh. Spencer, the Sacramento Sacksucker Church.
Wow, that was a lot.
Oh, no. I didn't want to say it.
That was a mouthful there.
I didn't want to say it when you emailed me that this is my name for the week.
Is that what happened?
I didn't want to say it. Man. I thought it was a little gross.
I must have been on the influence or something, because I do not remember sending that.
Yeah, you should go in your archives. You probably saved it somewhere. Today's episode is a lot more classy than that awful, gross introduction I just gave. We are going to be talking about 5 narrative types and examples for said narrative types. This is brought to you by NowNovel.com. I will put that in the show notes because, unlike some of our recent articles that we tried to cover, this one seems to actually be done well. No horrible ad placement. No nonsense.
Very, simple, direct.
Simple, direct. Do you see an author on here anywhere? Let me check at the bottom. I do not, so I cannot accredit anybody. But I will, like I said, put this in the show notes. Because I like doing that when we use people's articles. But this is how we learn.
Especially when they're a good one.
Yeah, I found quite a few, but this one seemed to be the most condensed with good examples. Because for me, I need examples. You can tell me something or describe it, but if you give me an example, that's the easiest way for me to learn it. There we go, that's what it is. I guess we should start with what is narrative? Because if you're really just in the beginning of your writing career, you might not even know the basics, so we'll cover them for you. Narrative is writing that connects ideas, concepts, or events. The definitions below show 3 important aspects of narration in storytelling. Number 1, It connects events, showing their patterns, relating them to each other or to specific ideas, themes, or concepts. Number 2, it is a practice and art in that when we tell a story, we shape the narrative, the connection between events. And number 3, narrating a story involves shaping events around an overarching set of aims or effects, whether consciously or unconsciously. For example, in a comedic narrative, the overarching aim is to surprise, shock, or otherwise lead the audience or reader to be amused. I guess I can say in my personal writing, I never really thought of the narration or the narrative in that kind of aspect. Like, I always thought, okay, this is the story I'm telling, but I never thought, like, oh, I'm just going to be set out to write a comedic narrative.
Yeah.
Like I'm writing, working on a few adventure stories. Yeah, I guess you could say it's an adventure narrative, but I never really thought of it like that. I'm just thinking this is the story I'm telling. But if you really look into it, kind of breaking it down into the narrative structure is a good idea, because then you can kind of go more heavy into the themes you're trying to relay. So if you want a comedic narrative, you can have, say, dramatic elements, but no, this is still a comedic narrative, so I need it to be overarching, like, still have the comedic aspect more than the dramatic aspect. If that makes sense. Here are 3 definitions of narrative via the Oxford English Dictionary that illustrates the above ideas. Fuck, you know what? When I was did the read this podcast with Ash, I forgot to ask him if British people really call aluminum aluminium. I should have.
Yeah.
I done fucked up.
Next time
when we get them on 6 months from now. 1, a spoken or written account of connected events, a story. 2, the practice of art or telling stories. And 3, a representation of a particular situation or process in such a way as to reflect or conform to an overarching set of aims or values. Alright, interesting. So now that we've clarified what narrative is, here are several types of narration with examples and tips for using them better. So strap in, folks. We're getting to the meat of the matter. We're getting on the ride and accelerating. Sorry, I don't know why I'm going into radio guy mode today. Just fucking saying stupid shit that doesn't need to be said. I kind of like it, though.
Yeah, it's fun.
Strap in. You get ready for this jackhammer of a ride.
Well, it's better radio guy than, like, strip club DJ.
Hey, welcome to Cinnamon on the stage, on the main stage. Get your Benjis out. I don't like strip club DJs either. Number 1, descriptive narrative. Descriptive narrative connects imagery, ideas, and details to convey a sense of time and place. The purpose of descriptive narrative. Descriptive narrative has 2 key purposes. Number 1, to create a sense of setting, of time, and place. 2, to convey the mood and tone of said time and place. Example, threatening, peaceful, cheerful, chaotic. When we describe a pastoral scene in a rural setting, for example, we might linger on specific images, such as a wide, empty field, an abandoned tractor, to build up an overarching mood, such as peaceful simplicity. You can brainstorm descriptive details for your narration or about your narrator in Now Novel's step-by-step prompt process. And if you go to the site, I guess you can find their step-by-step process. Yeah. In my stories, I definitely always try to set an atmosphere in regards to the setting. So, like, I think I showed you the beginning on one of the episodes of that adventure story I wrote. It was like a desolate field full of dead bodies, and I kind of described it being frozen and. Like, it's all, you only need a couple sentences. Like, that was a good example with the empty, land and the abandoned tractor. That's a good way to kind of, with a couple sentences, just give a setting, whether it's desolation or you can do like a bustling street in New York. You don't need a lot of imagery, just enough to get the reader involved in kind of being able to see, like, where the story's taking place without actually having to go too much into it. Example of descriptive narrative. The Colombian author Gabriel Garcia Marquez is a master of this type of narration. Also, folks, the reason I picked this article is because they actually use really well-known and good writers for their examples. In Love in the Time of Cholera, I did this last time we had to read this stupid word. In Love in the Time of Cholera, the third-person narrator describes the unnamed seaside city in the Caribbean where much of the novel takes place. Marquez narrates the passage through the eyes of Dr. Urbino, one of the city's most distinguished doctors. And here's the example from the story. The city, his city, stood unchanging on the edge of time, the same burning dry city of his nocturnal terrors and the solitary pleasures of puberty, where flowers rusted and salt corroded, where nothing had happened for 4 centuries except a slow aging among withered laurels and putrefying swamps. In winter, sudden devastating downpours flooded the latrines and turned the streets into sickening bogs. Damn, there's a lot happening there.
Yeah.
That just last part with the flooded fucking toilets and bogs, like, ooh. I just think of gross, swampy poop. Robert E. Howard did that in the one Conan story where they were just dumping human waste out the windows in the street, and it built up into these fucking big poop pits.
Yeah.
He didn't use such vivid words as I just did, but it was pretty good. In the space of a paragraph, Marquez shows how the city changes or doesn't change over centuries. This makes Marquez's setting more vivid and real. The narration passes from showing the city's history to its citizens' current ways of life. The narrator proceeds to describe the lives of poor inhabitants. During the weekend, they danced without mercy, drank themselves blind on home-brewed alcohol, made wild love among the ikako plants, and on Sunday at midnight, they broke up their own party with bloody free-for-alls. Again, pretty awesome. I liked the drinking themselves blind, and that just gives you this slight sense of desperation. Like, they're trying to ignore their lives because their lives are so terrible, so they just gotta drink and marauder and
the love making between the plants.
They're living for the day, is what you get from that. Over the course of 2 pages, Marquez masterfully shows the city's mood, culture, unique spirit. His narration then zooms in closer on individuals' lives. The multiple time scales in this narrative, past and present day, combine to give a rich sense of time and place. Side note, that's another one we got to cover is tenses. Do an episode about writing in past, present, and mixing and all that stuff. Because I read some stories where they do a good job of mixing past and present, and you're not even really aware it's happening. But some stories, it's so blatant in your face that jarring's a perfect word. You're like, ooh, you just don't like it.
I know that's especially in first drafts. That's a problem with me because you're just trying to get through the story and getting it on paper, and you don't sometimes realize earlier in that paragraph it was a was, and you did an is this time. Just
accidentally. That happens to me when I take a break from something I'm writing, and then I come back to it. And for whatever reason, I'll halfway through the story just start writing in a present tense. Yeah. And I'm like, when I go to the editing, I was like, now I got to switch every fucking word to past tense. It's a pain in the balls.
And then it's rough too because sometimes just switching that word, you have to switch the sentence.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Sometimes just changing that one word, it doesn't work. It doesn't fit right in that sentence. It sounds weird.
And then if you're doing a story where it has flashbacks and stuff, you have to really pay attention to what you're changing because you might accidentally change say you wrote the story in present tense and then you start writing in past tense on accident, you just switch and then you're like, oh fuck, I gotta switch it, and then you're like, oh, but the flashbacks they have to be in past tense. But I've read stories where people left the flashbacks in present tense too. I hate it. I'm like, what is happening? I don't like to have to focus this much to keep the story together.
Wait, what?
Okay, so next we are on to number 2, which is viewpoint narrative. Often, the express purpose of a section of narration is to help us understand the views and feelings of the narrating character or viewpoint narrator. Point of view, or POV, is thus a key element of narration. Read about different types. Okay, and again, they have more stuff you can click on when you go to the article. The purpose of viewpoint narrative presents events or scenes to us so that we understand them through narrators. That seems like that's worded weird to me. Viewpoint narrative presents events or scenes to us so that we see them through narrators' feelings, desires, beliefs, or values. It says that we understand them. They fucked up. It's like your first-person story. Yeah. Before I go on to this, a POV narrative is good because the reader can only see what the character sees.
Yeah.
So, especially if you're doing a monster story, horror, whatever you're doing, there's some lurking serial killer in the house. You don't know he's behind the door because the character doesn't know they're behind the door.
Yeah.
So you're on the ride with the character. That's always a fun read.
I find myself not doing a lot of first person unless if it's maybe a flash fiction or a shorter story because I don't. At least, for me now, I think to do, a full novel in first person would be pretty difficult, I would think.
That's why a lot of stories that I've read, that whole books that are first person, they either have multiple characters or they
that they can twist back and forth from. That's
or they do letters, newspaper clippings, random journal entries. They'll really skip around. It's usually you don't read a lot of novels. At least I haven't, where the whole thing's just first person, one character, and it sticks to it completely. Though they do say first person, which is kind of why a lot of people when they start writing, they write in first person narrative. It's because it's the easiest. It's like, I guess for most people, it's the hardest to fuck up because all you're doing is pretty much saying I. So you're just thinking like, okay, I'm the character in the story. This is what I see. This is what's happening. You don't have to describe things in a certain way that, like, say you do in third person where, like I said, with the serial killer behind the door. Well, how can you describe the serial killer behind the door letting the reader know it's there while still building tension and making it so you're scared for the character when they walk through the house?
The skill, like, just for that scenario is finding a way to build a tension, like, somehow finding a way to describe, like, if they're both on the same side of the wall, like, you know what I mean? And, like, literally, like, they're about to, as soon as they go around into the corner, they're gonna come face to face, like, you know what I mean? That's, I always bring it up because with the, that's one of the things, like, I enjoy about comics is because you could have all these different narrations in one issue. Yeah. And it would make sense.
Yeah, because it's visual.
And because, you can have one part of the story being narrated by some third person or just, somebody that's not even just the narrator. Mm-hmm. Or you can have it being narrated by the main character's thoughts. Or it's some other character's point of view from, like, so that's one of the things I really, really love about that medium is the way you can mess with that stuff.
Viewpoint narrative has power. We might interpret story events the way the narrator does, because we don't have a different viewpoint for comparison, or because their voice is strong, self-assured. Yet the viewpoint narrator in a scene may be unreliable. They can lie about what truly happened, or gloss over details that, for example, make them look worse to others. I like the unreliable narrator. That's always a good one.
Yeah.
Because think of like American Psycho. You don't know what's true and what's not true. You're just taking the character's word for it.
Would you find yourself writing more?
That's what I wanted to touch on. We'll get on that in
we'll cover that at the end.
But what I wanted to say was I personally have trouble like kind of going into a story and thinking what is my narration? Yeah. Like, am I going to be first person? Or because usually I'm telling it from like a third person perspective, but I always heard you're supposed to have somebody, either like somebody, it's the author narrating or an unknown narrator or something. Like, you can't just tell the story. Yeah. Well, I always find I'm just telling the story usually. And I think that's on this list, so we will get to that.
That's normally one of my biggest things with the story is figuring out
who's telling the story.
Yeah, like how you were just saying, what way am I gonna go through telling? Is it gonna be first person? Is it gonna be just like you were saying, a narrator or somebody that's involved with the story? Not like that's one of my biggest. Like, what's the best way to represent this idea that I have in my head?
Yeah, it's tough. Like I said, we'll touch on that because that is on here. So, going just back to the viewpoint narration. Authors like Vladimir Nabokov have written novels featuring protagonists who are unethical or even abusive. In novels such as Nabokov's Lolita, the reader has to remember that the narrating voice has its own agenda. And again, in that novel, it's from the view of a pedophile who's making it seem like he's not a creep. Yeah. Like he's not some sick, twisted adult man who's lusting after a young girl. Because in his mind, it's some kind of love and grand whatever. And I never read that novel, but apparently it is done very well, where you could be like, oh, I guess it is a love story. Then you're like, wait, no, ew.
You know what? Just kind of thinking about that, like what that guy is like. What people might have seen is that Hard Candy movie. Yeah, that's kind of like, this guy is actually like a creepy pedophile, but even like they almost make you feel bad.
Yeah, they make you feel bad for him a little bit.
Especially whenever the stuff starts to happen, and then at the end, though, you do realize, like no, man, fuck this guy.
Yeah, they'll remind you, no, he's a creep. Example of viewpoint narrative. Virginia Woolf is she is good at this. Virginia Woolf is a master of filtering events via individual characters' perceptions. She often switches between multiple characters' viewpoints within a single page. That's what we were talking about earlier.
Well, that would be tricky.
Yeah. This approach, called stream of consciousness, lets her reveal characters' different fixations and personalities. Take, for example, this scene in Mrs. Dalloway from 1925. Septimus Smith is a World War I veteran whose mental health is crumbling. His Italian wife, Rezia, feels unease and longs for her home country. Wolf switches from paragraph to paragraph between Septimus and Rezia's viewpoints in third person. Ooh, yeah. This was right. I'm interested to read this. This is an example of a passage from the story. Human nature, in short, was on him, the repulsive brute with the blood-red nostrils. Was he drunk? Jeez. Holmes was on him. Dr. Holmes came quite regularly every day. Once you stumble, Septimus wrote on the back of a postcard, human nature is on you. Holmes is on you. Their only chance was to escape without letting Holmes know. To Italy, anywhere, everywhere, away from Dr. Holmes. But Rezia could not understand him. Dr. Holmes was such a kind man. He was so interested in Septimus. He only wanted to help them, she said. Woolf's gift for narrative means that she can narrate individuals' fears and obsessions within a single page without breaking the flow. Woolf reports Rezia's words within narration instead of using dialogue. This allows Woolf's narrative and changing viewpoints to flow into each other without interruption. That's a unique way to do it because I would always think like the dialogue would be the easy way to do that. But to do it in third person, just in the narrative, to switch them back and forth and have it, make sense, like flow, and you don't get lost in the shuffle of what's happening, that is pretty tricky, I would think. I don't think I've ever really tried that so much.
And you would have to have such a command on what your characters are like.
Yeah.
To make so that, because that would be the only really way to prove, for people to so they, like you were saying, don't get confused on who's saying what and what's going on now.
Yeah, that's tough. But yeah, I would recommend reading some Virginia Woolf if you want good examples of that. Number 3, I wasn't so much interested in this one, but I'll cover it because we do have some nonfiction writers and even historical fiction writers. Number 3 is historical narrative, which I guess this doesn't necessarily just have to be history. This might be like date and times too, like if you just have stories set in certain... We'll see here. In genres such as biography, autobiography, and various historical subgenres, examples, historical romance or World War II fiction, a lot of narration recounts events in the past. Of course, the author may choose to tell a war story in a tumultuous present tense. There's no single way to narrate the past, yet it serves a common purpose. Haruki Murakami has had this in a couple of stories where he has fictitious World War II stories because he's a Japanese author and he's, I'm going to say he's probably in his late 60s or 70s now, so he probably came of age after World War II, so I'm sure it was fairly fresh in the country. But he'll throw in his stories like these pretty wild, like World War II individuals and World War II stories. Again, they're completely fictitious, I would hope, because they're pretty fucked up. But that's like a really cool example of being able to have a narrative, and usually they're in flashbacks, not the whole story, or like somebody's memory, and it's just always really cool when I read something like that. The purpose of historical narrative. One thing common to historical narrative in different genres is it shows historical process. It links causation from event to event, showing the chain reaction that lead to how things pan out. This is why in historical narrative, such as narration sharing a character's backstory, we often have words showing order of events, such as the words bolded in the example. I'm just going to say the words bolded in the example extra loud. First, the city was a fledgling thing. In the early days, there was one traffic light, and if you were doing your driver's license, you could be damn sure you'd have to drive past it. In later years, as the local publishing industry grew, it became a hotbed of hotshot journalists in training. So the city needed more traffic lights to write about, or real events at least. That's a flow, like a narrative flow, and it's using these transition words and phrases in such a way that you don't even notice it if I didn't highlight it for you.
See, like, the only time I normally ever see that is when somebody's like screaming or yelling or something like that. That's the only time I ever really see like the text bold. Like,
well, they just put it in bold for the example, so they were highlighting the transition words here. A sense of historical cause and effect of long stretches of time condensed is typical of historical narrative. I mean, the most basic examples would be, first he punched her in the mouth. Second, he fucking uppercutted her in the ribs. Yeah. Third, and then, keep going on such and such. I don't know why somebody beating up a lady. Sorry. I've fucking been trapped in the house for a while. No. Example of historical narrative. Oh, man. This guy's got a unique name. Arundhati Roy's novel, The God of Small Things, written in 1997, about tragedies that strike twin siblings born in Amen. Yeah, Amen. The God of Small Things is about tragedies that strike twin siblings born in Ayamenanim in India and their family, is full of rich historical narration. For those who don't know, we are usually pretty terrible at pronouncing people's names, city names from around the world, but I am especially terrible at Indian names.
Oh, yeah.
I have not read much things either set in India or just dealing with India. That's it's on my bucket list. I just haven't gotten that far. I'm lucky I can still pronounce Russian names. And you know what? When I look them up after the fact, Americans pronounce all Russian names wrong. Even like names like Vladimir aren't Vladimir. They're like a weird WV sound. Like you can't.
Or we just simplify for us.
Yeah, like Khabib Nurmagomedov or what from the UFC. His name's not actually Khabib; it's Habib.
Yeah.
But there's a K in there, so we just call him Khabib because we're stupid. And he's just like, my name's Habib. And it's like that seems like a simple one. We should be able to. But like Anna Karenina is a great example because some people call it Anna Karenina, some call it Anna Karina. But when I look up the actual Russian way it said, it was like Anna Good Kid. Kiradina, like it was something Russian. They speak with their throat. I can't do that. Arabic names also I suck at.
Oh yeah.
Oh, so much throaty.
Yeah.
I can't. That area, the Middle East area, I am terrible at that. Anyway, after I horribly sidetracked this, I'm sorry. Roy reveals the unusual, individualistic nature of one twin, Rahel, by telling the reader Rahel's schooling background. Rahel was first blacklisted in Nazareth convent at the age of 11 when she was caught outside her house mistress's garden gate decorating a knob of fresh cow dung with small flowers. Oh, that's gross. An assembly the next morning, she was made to look up depravity in the Oxford Dictionary and read aloud its meaning. Well, I would imagine she's an Indian girl and they hold cow sacred, so that's why she was, just, they don't think she's just loving cow dung. Still kind of strange that you're putting flowers on cow dung, but it is what it is. Roy proceeds to narrate Rahel's expulsion, revealing Rahel's inquisitive mind in the process. 6 months later, she was expelled after repeated complaints from senior girls. She was accused, quite rightly, of hiding behind doors and deliberately colliding with her seniors. When she was questioned by the principal about her behavior, cajoled, caned, starved, she eventually admitted that she had done it to find out whether breast hurt. Another slight deviation. What do you feel about parentheses in your stories? I don't do it very often. I try not to because I don't generally like it. Like in this example, it's in here a couple times, but Stephen King uses it quite often in some of his stories. Because, again, just kind of going back to who's the narrator, I always feel like, well, now that feels like the author speaking to me when I see something like that.
The only time I find myself doing that is whenever I have my narrator is kind of like a smartass.
Yeah.
Because, like, you can, like...
But again, that's a specific narrator if you're having a character narrate. But I'm talking if you're just doing, like, no narrator. It's just you telling the story. Then I would feel like if you threw that in there, it would be like the author is adding that.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, there's some times when you can have, like, a narrator that isn't actually somebody from the story, but they can still, like, the way... Because, I know you haven't read it, but like Stephen King, since we brought him up, like we always do, his Underneath the Dome is kind of like that. It's narrated by somebody that's not stuck underneath the dome. It's just like a third person narrator, but the way that person kind of narrates and the way they say things about, like, especially against like certain characters or how they describe certain characters. Right. You know what I mean? It's like it's almost kind of like. It's another character telling you the story, but it's not a character in the story.
That's how I feel like a lot of my stories are told.
Yeah.
Like a character who, like, you don't really think about who's telling the story. And again, I think that's one of the, either the last one or the next one on this list.
But like that, again, that's the only time I ever used, because if you're
sometimes it does feel necessary to throw those parentheses in there. Like, what you put is just like, that's not going to read right unless I put that in parentheses. Yeah. Through narrating events in the past and Rahel's schooling, Roy fleshes out a sense of her character. She shows her inquiring, rule-breaking nature while also showing the strict social backdrop that conflicts with it. By narrating Rahel's history or backstory, Roy foreshadows future conflicts between Rahel's individualism and society's expectations. Number 4, linear narrative. Now we're getting to the meat of the matter. Linear narrative is narrative where you tell events in the order they happen, i.e. in sequence. This type of narrative is typical of realist fiction where the author wants to create the sense of a life unfolding as a character experiences day to day or year to year life. And this is kind of like a lot of most classic literature is written like this, like, just kind of a linear story beginning to end. And probably 90% of my stories are written like this.
I wouldn't say that's a good...
I mean, I'll throw flashbacks and stuff, but still the actual main plot doesn't... It's not like Pulp Fiction. It's not skipping around.
I'd say, a good chunk of fiction is more or less a linear, like...
Yeah.
Unless if you get them shows or movies like Pulp Fiction, or I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there are those things where they play with the time of when things happen, or when they let you know things, or even you haven't watched it, but like Westworld is very
Well, I heard The Witcher's like that, real strong. You don't know what the fuck's happening because the time keeps switching,
which can be awesome or can be very not good depending on how you play it.
And if you do it in a book, it also makes the reader have to pay attention.
Yeah.
Which is, in my opinion, not required, but it's definitely a good thing to have, because if the reader, in my personal opinion, if the reader is able to read your book while kind of fucking around on their phone or not really paying attention, one, it probably means you did write it very well, if they're able to still follow what's happening, but or at least tell the story very well. But two, it means you probably need to be a little, unless you're writing just something that's kind of a surface level Twilight type of story, you probably need to have some deeper parts of that story or your storytelling ability, because I don't like fiction where I can just kind of breeze through it and not really pay attention and still get the gist of the whole story. I want to be able to take something away from my books, but it depends what you're reading though.
Yeah.
If you're just reading a cheesy romance or something, okay, you can have it like that, but that's an episode for another day. The purpose of linear narrative. Linear narrative shows causation clearly. When we see what happened to a character yesterday, then today, then tomorrow, it's often easier to notice patterns and chains of cause and effect. Stories told in a linear time frame might be told mainly using past, present, or even future tense. Yet each event flows on simply from the previous incident described. Often this helps to create what Will Self calls Will Self, that's a guy's name?
Oh, wow.
That's very poor.
His parents were assholes.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate name just because it sounds like a phrase. Often this helps to create what Will Self calls the texture of lived life. As we see characters going through this, then that, then the next thing. Example of linear narrative. Is it linear or linear? It's linear. Why am I saying linear?
I was wondering, but that was
You should have corrected me, you fool. You don't get to correct me often.
But see, that's the thing. I figured I was wrong. I was like, have I been saying it wrong all this time?
I don't know why. Did I say it the first time like that?
I don't think so, no.
What the fuck is linear? I've heard that before. Maybe it is. You can pronounce it both ways. It's linear, though. I don't know. Sorry, folks. Sometimes my brain...
I kept on, as you were going through, I'm like, linear? I was like, how often am I right about how to say something? I should probably just shut my mouth. I'll let the comments take care of it.
So many people turned off the episode once they heard me keep saying linear. The third time. Linear just sounds stupid. I don't know what I'm thinking. Anyway, example of linear narrative. David Mitchell's genre... You should have fucking... You gotta tell me these things. Once I start reading too many weird names and stuff, I start getting a little just...
Everything looks like, how do I say this? There gotta be some trick to it.
I turned into David Spade and Chris Farley from Tommy Boy, and they're just flying down the road all hot, popped up on nitrous. Rude.
Or just you turn into the teacher from the Keenan Pierce skit. Aaron? Where's Aaron?
Example of linear narrative. Dave, and you said it right, and I heard you say it, and I thought to myself, yeah, that's right. And then I just kept saying linear.
That's another reason why I was like, maybe I said it wrong.
That's like somebody's name. Oh, well, I'm just doing that to make sure you people were paying attention.
Yeah.
Example of linear narrative. David Mitchell's genre-bending Cloud Atlas, 2004, spans multiple eras, settings, and characters, and is non-linear as a whole. Yet one section of his book titled Half-Lives, the first Louisa Ray mystery, is written as a mystery thriller. This section in itself is linear narrative told in the present tense. Louisa Ray is a young journalist who becomes a target of powerful people when she investigates health and safety failings at a nuclear power plant. Mitchell creates suspense and tension by placing Louisa's narration in third person and the present tense. The present tense narrative creates a sense of immediate action unfolding now. Mitchell also creates tension by separating Ray's inner monologue from events happening around her. Here's the example from the excerpt from the story. Louisa Ray hears a clunk from the neighboring balcony. Hello? Nobody. Her stomach warns her to set down her tonic water. It was the bathroom you needed, not fresh air, but she can't face weaving back through the party, and anyway, there's no time. Down the side of the building she heaves. Once, twice, a vision of greasy chicken, and a third time. The linear chain of events, feeling uneasy and ill at a party, getting sick, occur on a simple timeline of this happens, then that. I never really thought of it that way. You could have like a non-linear story and then just throw in, like, I mean, I guess it's not really thrown in. It would just be one part of the, like, if you broke it down to scenes.
Yeah.
One scene could be from, this happened, that happened, that happened. That makes perfect sense. It's not really breaking your non-linear style of telling the story just to have one scene play out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And number 5, non-linear narrative. Different types of narrative include narration that does not follow events in the order they happen. Chronological events, e.g. what happens in 1990 followed by what happens in 1991, don't have to match up with the order of narrative events. The author might share key details from 1991 before going back to the events of 1990 in the story. The purpose of nonlinear narrative has various uses. It can represent the narrator's emotional state or consciousness. For example, a severely traumatized narrator who has flashbacks might tell events in a jumble of chapters set in different years, out of sequence, as they try to piece together fragments of memories. It's like a Johnny Mnemonic type of thing.
Yeah.
House of Leaves was kind of like that. It was all over the fucking place. Like, if you read the narrative structure of that book, geez, that had everything. It can show stories with related art. I guess, what is this, number 2?
Yeah.
Did I read number 1? Yeah, I read number 1. Number 2, it can show stories with related arcs or themes unfolding in different places and times. In Michael Cunningham's retelling of a sort of Wolfe's Mrs. Dalloway, characters living in different time periods have personal experiences and tragedies that echo events from Wolfe's book as well as Wolfe's own life. That's interesting. Number 3, it can build suspense. For example, Donna Tartt opens The Secret History by telling the reader about a murder. We next meet the murder victim alive as the story jumps back to the event leading to his killing. Example of nonlinear narrative. Linear, damn it, why do I keep saying linear now? I'm starting to hate myself. You know what I feel like? Every time I fucking hear Joe Rogan say Star Trek.
Oh.
Every time, or William, what does he call him? William Shatner.
Yeah.
He always calls him William Shatner. And it's like, you know his name. I know you know his name. Example of nonlinear narrative. Donna Tartt's prologue to The Secret History 1992, is a masterful piece of nonlinear narrative. Within the first page, we know there's been a murder and the first-person narrator is somehow complicit. Tartt's opening paragraph reveals a lot, but still builds anticipation. The show in the mountains was melting.
The snow?
I know. I'm fucking drinking this dry-ass beer.
It's
like drying my mouth out now. That's just how it's like I got peanut butter in my mouth.
You gotta drink more beer then. You gotta liquid that thing up.
It's not working. I tried.
Drink more.
Shut up. The snow in the mountains was melting, and Bunny had been dead for several weeks before we came to understand the gravity of our situation. He'd been dead for 10 days before they found him. You know, it was one of the biggest manhunts in Vermont history. State troopers, the FBI, even an Army helicopter. The college closed, the dye factory in Hampton shut down. People coming from New Hampshire, upstate New York, as far away as Boston. Did we read that before? Not the actual book, but I feel like I read that passage before on here. About Bunny being... The first sentences. That's what that was from, the episode of the first sentence about Bunny being dead.
Yeah.
Well, there, we got the full paragraph now. Yet next thing we know, we're back in the days when the narrator first met Bunny, and Bunny Corcoran is very much alive. This non-linear recalling of events gives us a dramatic moment before its build-up, yet Tartt still delays our complete gratification by making us wait for a full understanding of what happened and why. We are 41 minutes into this episode, and that's when my brain stops working, just so you know. That's when I can't read anymore. The words are jumbling. We're almost done here, folks. Use examples of narrative to improve your own narration. And these are just a couple tips here, or I guess, I don't know, prompts. Number 1, write a paragraph of historical narrative. 2, write a scene using viewpoint narrative. And that's it. That still didn't actually cover what I originally wanted to cover, and that was narrators.
Yeah,
That's what I should have looked up. We looked up narrative.
That's a completely different thing.
Maybe that'll be the next episode we do. I wanted to cover how to, and I thought that's what I looked up originally, was different narrators. Like we have, the first person, like, oh, this is what happened to me, or this is what I witnessed. You have like somebody writing letters. H.P. Lovecraft does that a lot. It's a first person narrative where the narrator is someone who's writing letters, and he'll switch narrators during the story. But it's like written through letters and stuff.
Sometimes I like those ones the best because it's like those ones, there's a dialogue.
Yeah.
That breaks it up a little bit other than just like paragraph of describing everything that's happening in crazy detail.
Yeah, it's a little too much. But for me, again, it's the whole thing of who is narrating this story. That's where my problem usually lies because I write in third person most of the time. Like third person past tense, but I don't ever really establish a narrator too much.
Yeah, like this is Steve telling the story.
Yeah, this is Steve recounting what happened or something. I don't really have that. I don't have like once upon a time in a book found in the woods, this was the story that unfolded in its pages. Like I don't do stuff like that generally. Maybe I should. I don't know if it really matters because I feel like as soon as you get into the story, you're not thinking about that.
Yeah, it's cool, especially with that example because that example is just like you don't know who that once upon a time guy
well, like
is.
We talked about the Conan stories before. Who was the narrator on most of those? Nobody?
No.
It was just Conan's adventures, right? I never really thought about who was telling the story. Obviously, there's, people that were involved, what was happening to them, but it wasn't from Conan's perspective.
Yeah, because there's plenty of stories where it's like the main character, the story's not throwing through that person. Like, which, because, like, we talk about that's probably the easiest because I always find me liking stories, or at least I'm always reading stuff to where, like, stuff is happening. Like more than what the characters know. Of what's going on, like with a mystery or whatever, and it's like you have to, you seeing them trying to figure whatever it is out.
Well, we're definitely having to do an episode about narrators because, like, I was thinking when I read Tom Sawyer, it was, I guess it was just Mark Twain telling you the story, but there was multiple parts where it was like, as the author, I'm telling you, like it was. It was like Mark Twain when he's doing his orating, when he would do like a stand-up or whatever where he was telling you stories. It was like that in written form.
Okay.
So he was telling the story, I would guess. It didn't establish the narrator, but I'm pretty sure it was just Mark Twain. I don't know. Honestly, I don't really pay attention too much to that in stories unless it's like, a main focal point at the beginning. It's like, this is who's telling the story. I generally don't really pay attention too much. Like House of Leaves, it was... there was a lot of ways that story was told, but it's through like the one main character. He was the main guy, and there was multiple people telling the story. But it was never just like an aimless, the story being told, and you're not sure who was telling it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. But like, if you watch movies, you don't think of movies like who's telling the story of this movie. Like sometimes there is, but like there's a lot of movies where it's just happening.
Yeah.
Nobody's telling it, and like a lot of movies based on books is the same. Like The Road. When I was reading, I read The Road. Who the fuck was the narrator of The Road? Nobody. It was just about a kid and his dad wandering through the apocalypse. Yeah. There was no narrator. It wasn't a book they found, or there wasn't somebody just telling you the story. It wasn't the author. It was just like what was happening to them. So that's kind of that's my wheelhouse, I guess. That's how I write. Yeah. I just don't have a narrator, but maybe we should start establishing narrators in at least some of our stories.
Again, it's whatever serves the story best.
Yeah, now when I was doing like the H.P. Lovecraft first-person style stories, then I was doing the narrator because it was the guy who was telling what happened to him. He was writing it down, which again, that was very easy to write because you're just like, oh, like you don't have to focus on that too much. But we'll tackle that in a future episode. I hope you folks learn some stuff. What's your preferred narrative style?
Probably third person.
Just the third part. Well, I mean, as far as
just
the
like
viewpoint narrative.
Yeah. Again, I don't do many
linear.
More of a linear. Again, with not graduating to the bigger length of fiction. With it like being just like a normal short story.
You don't really have to think about it too much.
Yeah, and it doesn't like. doesn't play as much of a factor, I think. If you can...
I'm pretty sure all your stories that I've read were linear.
Yeah.
Like, they were just kind of beginning to end order.
Yeah, it's just a chain of events that happened. Didn't really do any, like, flashbacks or, like, anything like that, really.
I mean, I'll throw flashbacks and stuff in my stories, but it's still the main story is told.
Yeah.
I don't skip around. That would be hard. Like, to keep it all on track. Like, not just keeping track, but keep the reader from getting confused.
Yeah.
You have to be really good at writing. I don't think I'm up there yet. I never tried my hand at it, but to skip, like, I can skip various scenes where, like, here's this scene, and then, across the globe, here's what's happening to this person. Like, I could do that pretty easy, but in regards to actual time periods, I've never really fucked around too much with that. Like, have one character, it's Monday, and, this is what happened on Monday, then all of a sudden we skip to fucking Saturday 2 days before.
Yeah.
I don't think I've really tried that. I would have to look through my stuff to see, but I don't think I messed around with that too much. What were the other ones? The historical one I'm not too interested about. Because when like I said, I write like flashbacks and stuff, but I don't really focus too much on that. And the viewpoint narrative, that's I've done that before.
And we haven't really wrote anything like in a time period like that would be considered like. Well, I mean, you did that that Western story, but
yeah, I've had a bunch of stories set in specific time periods, but at the same time, I don't think any of them really dealt too much with the actual period of time. Yeah. I mean, the Western story was set in that time, but I wasn't like really focused on, that lifestyle back then. It was more just about the characters. Obviously the town and stuff was old Western towns, but the setting wasn't the main.
Yeah.
I think if you're telling that kind of story, like World War II or something, the setting's clearly a big part of the story. My story could have easily been a modern story set in the West almost. Yeah. Like, it didn't really it'd have to be a specific time period. Anyway, folks, if you want to check out our work and see if you could break down some of our narrative structures by reading our stories, you can head on over to drunkenpenwriting.com. You can follow us on the old Twitter if you'd like, at drunkpenwriting. You can go to Instagram at drunkenpenwriting. We haven't really shared much on there. I post like the stories, but I haven't done like pictures. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
I do too many things, man, but I also feel like I don't do anything.
Yeah, right.
Isn't that the bad part? It's like, I feel like I don't do anything. It's like, I go to work, I do this, I do that, but then at the same time, I feel like I don't accomplish anything. It's like this weird limbo that's awful. You can also check us out on Facebook. People seem to like the Facebook. I don't. Drunken Pen Writing. That's where we get most of our interaction anymore. Like, people commenting on stuff and sending messages, and it's like, okay, that's cool. Facebook makes me mad, okay? A lot of douchebags on there, okay? And as of, what's today, the 24th? Friday?
Yeah.
Friday. By the time this airs on Tuesday, hopefully you folks have wisened up and are not drinking bleach and Clorox and all that stuff like the president said.
Yeah, don't inject yourself with Vicks infection or whatever it
Lysol or whatever. Yeah, don't do any of that.
Just what was it, like sunlight? Did he want something to do with just sunlight?
Going, I don't know. I guess he thinks humans are vampires and we can kill the vampire gene by burning it out with sunlight. There's a lot of questionable science going on, but not by scientists.
Pseudoscience if I've ever seen it.
All right. Oh, God.
This is like worse than bro science.
Yeah.
Because at least bro science, you'd be like, well.
It's pseudoscience, but it's like there's some. Like, I heard somebody say something that sounded reasonable. It sounds reasonable. Drinking Clorox doesn't sound reasonable at all. Anyway, if you folks are interested, you can check out the Ear Read This podcast. I was just on there last week, so.
Good episode. I listened to it.
Yeah. Hunter S. Thompson, I mean, we both. Them and us have covered him before, but we just kind of went over his life and talked about some wacky stuff. And folks, also remember, we will be reading The Big Sleep here soon by Raymond Chandler. If you want to get your hands on a copy, now's the time. We'll probably be starting that within the next week here. And take it easy, ladies and men and sexy people, and I don't know what to call them. I don't know what I'm doing. What do I do? I'm panicking.
Just stop.
I can't just stop.
Hit the button.
It'd be weird.
Hit the button.